Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazzard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazzard, and I have got a female podcaster today who has really accelerated the community building for women in the C-suite specifically. So she's narrowed in deeply on exactly the kinds of leaders she wants to talk to, the kinds of leaders she wants to be her listeners, and she's made them one and the same, which I think is part of her key here. So let me introduce you to Natalie Benamou. And Natalie and I met on at a women's pitch event. She was brought in to talk about podcasting, and I was brought in to pitch. And I was one of a select few companies that were allowed to pitch at the event. So it was kind of interesting. We got to meet each other that way. And so far, I've been on her show already, HerCsuite Radio, which we'll bring to you, and you'll be able to link through in the blog post for this episode. But in the meantime, let me do a little introduction to Natalie. Natalie has accelerated her career to leadership positions in both the marketing industry and nonprofits. She is a rainmaker, achieving a high level of client success, generating over $110 million in sales revenue. Natalie is a leadership expert and the host of HerCsuite Radio podcast, and she is a sought-out speaker for events and conferences, including the Healthcare Business Women's Association, the HBA National Conference, HCEA Connect, and podcasts like Conscious Millionaire, Brave Women at Work, Go Find Out, What's Your Ask, and Lioness Magazine featured articles. She is just incredible in her care for her community, and you're going to hear that come through in this interview. So let's hear it from Natalie. Natalie, thanks for joining me. I'm so glad to be following up, and it was fun being on your show, and it's been a while since we were together, so excited to catch up on your show too. So HerCsuite Radio.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here with you. It's so good to see you again. We were just catching up a little bit before, and I'm glad to see you. It's wonderful.
I know. This is my favorite part about podcasting, is that we get to catch up on what each other's doing, and we're doing some business for our businesses while we're doing it. Right?
Exactly.
It's very productive.
Winning all the way around.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. So you're about to hit 100 episodes as we're recording this. How does it feel?
You know, it's funny. My last podcast, and I think you know that I had a podcast before this one called Rock Your Trade Show, and it ended on the 100th. So I'm looking past 100 on this one.
So you're gonna go right past that milestone.
This little thing like called the pandemic was like no more podcast. So I'm excited for this one because it is a milestone, and I just recorded my 100th yesterday. So I'm excited.
Well, congratulations. Did you make any decisions about that 100th episode that you were going to do something different, or?
Yes, I had the person that I launched the podcast with. Her name is Roz Asheroff. Shout out to Roz. She did my first podcast episode, and she interviewed me. And so we did it again at the 100th, and I had the chance to have a conversation with her, and she's such a wonderful interviewer, and she's got her own podcast. I'm going to be on that next week. So it's like,
that's fantastic. And you know what? I think that's a really great model for all of you listeners out there to think about. It's like having this, I'm going to call it bookending, right? Where you start your first and you end with your 100th. It creates this like new intro episode in a way, right? It creates a new milestone episode. So if people don't really want to go all the way back to the beginning and listen to every episode, at least it gives them a good point that kind of pushes them into going back to at least that one and listen.
At least that one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Things have changed.
And it helps to recap that, right? It helps to say, how has this changed in 2 years?
Yeah. And looking forward, it's really about the future. We'll try to look forward. I think some of us are like, we look back, but like, do we really want to think about the last 2 years? Not so much.
Yeah, let's look forward. Looking forward, you made some changes to your show. Yeah. What changes are you going to make in the next 100?
Yeah. So I'm just experimenting with a few things, trying to change out the intros and how I'm doing them. And the episode, the flow is the same kind of 5-question flow, 5 to 6 questions, but just testing out the waters, and I think I might change the music up. That's something fun. Woo!
Yeah, woo, a little new music. Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Yeah,
And you know,
I'm
it's
gonna change the music.
so Natalie's intro is done where there's like a comment from the guest and some kind of statement that they make. And then she does an intro that is talking about what the show's about and then transitioning into the guest. And there's a little music that kind of ties everything through.
Mm.
And it's nicely done. It's a great format. Lots of people like to do it, but it's also a little bit more complex. She and I talked about that, right? It takes more time because you do have to plan it. You have to pick the clip, you know, and sometimes it's not totally necessary. Like your podcast listeners don't necessarily need that. So it may be a choice of just easing things up on you. And that's what you're testing out right now, right? It's just a little bit more of like letting them do an intro.
Yes. And my creative director, Megan, has started doing little video clips from the interview that we're, instead of having an audiogram, we're doing video. So that's a new thing of like side by side. So maybe I'll
But
have
you're
to go
not
back
publishing the video for the whole episode.
not the whole episode yet, although you did recommend that on our podcast and I have not forgotten that. And so I do have a YouTube channel now. Thanks to you.
Okay, good. So you got a place to put it. Well, you can use those little
Yes.
videos in your YouTube. You can start it in a YouTube Shorts playlist.
Shorts, that's where we got them.
Yep, exactly. And I'm shocked at how they do for people. So
I know. Well, I learned that from you.
yeah.
True story. I learned it from you. So
that's
thank
so
you.
good. Oh, I'm so glad that was useful.
Yes. Take action. Take action. That's what you got to do when you hear these tips.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how you started. So you had a podcast before, and then you shifted into HerCsuite Radio. And it really was also I'm going to call it a slight audience elevation, an audience shift of where you were going as well. You were focusing. Why did you decide that you were going to continue podcasting though, in that shift of your business?
You know, I love podcasting. I'm a curious person. And just like you, I love hearing stories, and I could not do it. I stopped for a couple of weeks one time, even on the HerCsuite Radio, and I missed it. I was like, what am I doing? I got to get back to this. This is crazy town. So it is one of my favorite things to do. I love meeting people. It opens doors to new opportunities, both for me and for the person. I'm a super connector. I love connecting people, and it's just been a joy. So I'm glad I decided to do it again.
I am too. I think it's really great. And what I really want to talk about today is like you're nurturing this community of people, and they're all interested in elevating their executive levels. And, you know, how is that working for you? And what efforts do you put into like find the right guests and do all of these things to try to make that sort of engagement piece in the community happen? So
it started, initially when I started my podcast, just kind of like my business, I started asking my friends, right? Like, who's interesting that I know? You got to be on the show. A lot of the people in the beginning of HerCsuite Radio, if anyone does go back to the beginning, first 25, were people that were actually on Rock Your Trade Show that were friends before. So I recycled and had them again. Things have changed.
New stories though.
Yeah, new stories. Yeah, it had been 3 or 4 years, and, it was nice to have them come on. But, thinking about the community, it's really about listening to where they're stuck and what are they struggling with. And we started HerCsuite with the idea that we surround ourselves with the people that we want to make our own board of advisors. And that was kind of the inspiration for HerCsuite Radio. But now it's broadened out for every career phase. And so I really think about that listener, as you do too. You think about who's that one person that I'm speaking to, and then it transcends maybe out. And so I try to have content that is relevant to her in her different phases of her career. So I might have something that is, inspirational. And I've had many book authors on the show, which has been really fun. And now I'm getting more laser focused on the business, which is how can I kind of help with that? And I know that's one of your questions later, so I don't want to give it away yet.
No, but let's segue into that, because I do want to talk about that, because, clearly as you get these guests and as you continue to move forward, it's like you're being laser focused on what the audience wants. So the guests need to be a right fit for that.
Yes.
And have you gotten more and more selective as you've gone through the process?
I have, and I've enjoyed several podcasting agencies reach out to me. I'm sure you get a lot of those inquiries a lot. And I've been saying no a lot more because they're not aligned, whether it's the topic or it's always the same type of person. And it's like, well, that's not, I want to give variety to our listeners and make them be curious about what we're going to talk about. And if it's always the same topic, it's not going to be very interesting. So I've been much more selective, and I'm very grateful for people continuing to reach out to me, but there is definitely changed up a little bit in the last maybe 3 months or so. I've been more focused looking forward into 2023.
I'm hearing
Yeah.
that from a lot of podcasters right now as they look back on their prior year and start to focus on the next year. They've been all that selectiveness and curation have been the themes that are going on in a heavier way. So, and I think that's really smart for you, because if you don't surround yourself, I mean, it's like you were talking about, surround yourself with the right board of directors, right? The right people, it's not going to accelerate you.
Right. Absolutely. For sure.
That's an essential component of the community, is access to these great guests that you're bringing in, the stories and the information and process. How are you growing the community itself, increasing listeners and then leading them into the community? What do you do on that side of things?
You know, it's so funny you asked this, because I know this is a question and I know the answer that a lot of people give. And I find surprisingly that when I'm on someone else's podcast, I instantly get people that want to join HerCsuite. And I'm not saying this because I'm expecting anyone to join HerCsuite now, watching this or hearing this, but I had one person, it's interesting to me when you don't meet that person, because HerCsuite has been a very high touch experience where I would talk to the person and tell them about it, and then they would join, or same with the business. And I recently was on a podcast and someone joined HerCsuite, and I was like, wait a second, I don't know her.
How did that happen? Like you're growing so fast.
I was like, wait,
but she probably knows you because she's been listening to you.
She said, I heard you on this other, not your podcast, on a different podcast. And I was like, what? Like, I had no idea.
The resonate,
which was so cool. That was really cool.
In fact, I think that's that's a topic we're going to do coming up in one of our coaching calls. But the idea of podcast swapping is really, I'm going to say underappreciated, because this is so much easier. My audience are all listeners, right? They're listening here. So the media type is matched. And that's, I think, really important, is that you're more likely to get a listener from this
which would
podcast guesting on somebody else's show than you are going on their video or going on. It's just not a direct correlation to the media type that they like to consume in the way that they like to learn. So I think that's underappreciated. So good for you that you're like, do more of that. Right.
I have actually a member in HerCsuite. So I'm going to give a shout out. Brave Women at Work is her podcast, Jen Pastigas. And we've swapped a couple times. Like I was on her, she just wrote a book, and I was like, oh, you got to come back. So I do give priority to people that are in HerCsuite. You asked about guests. I look for people that I can elevate inside the community first, always, whether they're speakers for us or on the podcast, but I get people outside as well. So
I was just talking to the host of Elevate, which is a different podcast, but also an organization for women as well. And we came up with a suggestion, and it hasn't aired yet, so you wouldn't have heard it. But we came up with a suggestion that I bet you if you looked at some of those those women that you had on your show over the last year and checked the statistics and or the topics, you might find some theme, and they make better panelists. Because you already know enough about them, it makes it easier to run a panel with them, or
for sure.
Yeah. And so you can go back and check your podcast stats and see who's resonating with your audience. It's
so good.
Easy choice, right?
It is. Absolutely. For sure. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about that business side of things and that shift into the, obviously you're monetizing your community and the growth of that and HerCsuite in general. So let's talk about what that looks like for you and how the flow through from the podcast, the podcast reinforces that.
I did this on Rock Your Trade Show, and it worked really well. And so I've just now started to implement it, as we were talking about that targeting of guests, finding a guest at a company that I would love to be partnering with or serving their community. And it gives you the opening. It's like a soft intro, right? You're like, I love what you're doing. I find them on LinkedIn, a woman on LinkedIn, and we connect, and I'd be so honored to have you on the show. And then you have that opportunity at the end. Who do you know that I could speak to at your organization that is responsible for this? And that actually opened the door to my biggest client, corporate client, from that. So being able to kind of soft network and appreciate that opportunity, but not being overly like, it's not, I'm not taking it for granted that she might give me that person. There's no pressure about it. It's not on air. It's off air, but it's a really nice way to meet people that I can serve. And so if the opportunity is there, that is how I see it as a door opener to connect with someone else further, deeper into the organization.
And I think that's an underappreciated view of podcasting, right? That I think that the connections that I've made with my guests, those that become network partners, high referral partners, joint venture, whatever you want to call them, affiliates, even like I probably have more of those than I have the ones that became, just clients or just members, right? It's a much more direct path to partnership. It feels more at a different level when you're guesting with someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you get that. Well, I think also because podcasting, you're hearing their story, you're connecting on a meaningful level. And so they feel comfortable with you and they know you a little bit more. So it's not this, hey, because we get a lot of those on the biggest business network, right? We get a lot of those like not out of left field asking you for stuff. And you're like, you did not
I'm
even
a little
look at my
tired of the
name.
questions for virtual coffee. I'm like, I don't know you. Why do you want to have virtual coffee with me? What's in it for me is really the question.
I think it's always the leads. You know, what's really funny is the LinkedIn leads. When people like say to me, like, are you looking for LinkedIn leads? And I look at their profile and they have 200 connections. And I'm like, do you know how to get leads on LinkedIn?
That's really, so. What are you doing? Yeah.
What are you doing? No.
Yeah. Exactly. We're, inundated with that. So when something's more care about me, right?
Yes.
We respond better to that.
Yeah. Serve first. I mean, that is my mentality anyway. So I want to serve that person first in whatever I can do to help her. And then hopefully there's a next conversation. That's all I'm looking for in that instance.
So we're planning to air this on International Women's Day, and I'm very excited. You're running a panel.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the panel. I mean, it'll probably already have happened, but I'm sure there's going to be a recording somewhere that they could find, right?
Yes.
And I also want to know is like, what's that mission that you're trying to accomplish for bringing women together?
So the theme this year, International Women's Day, is March 8th. It happens during Women's History Month. And I recently interviewed an amazing author who said, I'd like the day where we don't need Women's History Month. Every day should be Women's Day. And, we don't need these months to recognize this. But for now, this is where we are. And so it's Women's History Month and it's International Women's Day. And the International Women's Day, for those listening, there is always a theme. It is internationalwomensday.org, and they always have a wonderful theme. This year it's Embrace Equity. And to me, equity is more than fairness. It's much broader and deeper in a woman's life, her career. And so I picked panelists that I knew would really be able to speak to 4 areas that touch a woman in terms of equity: health, wealth, access, and impact. So those 4 categories we're going to talk about on the panel. And I'm really excited about it because I think they each bring, one's a medical doctor for the health portion, health equity, which is my personal passion. And it's going to be a great opportunity to share their stories, but also to help women see what is possible in terms of equity. And it's beyond equity. It's not just equity. It's not fairness, but it's broader than that.
Well, and I think that there's this misconception, and this is where I see your binge factor, and I'm going to do that, sort of shout out to what that is here. But by planting the idea that this is her C-suite, that equity doesn't mean the same, that equity means that we equalize things, but it doesn't mean that it's exactly the same. So our C-suite doesn't have to look like the old boys C-suite. It doesn't have to look like that. To be equitable in the future, right? It just has to, have the right outcome.
Exactly. I mean, it was the stats, I think, that I saw the summer of 2020 when someone was celebrating hey, isn't it great? There's 3 women in the Fortune 500 or something pathetic like that. It was so bad, the stats. And they were like, look, there's progress. One more person is a woman. And now it's 10 people and I was like, what is going on? And I talked with someone that is head of a really big organization of very high level women. And she said, maybe they just don't want us at the table. And I said, you know what? We need our own seat and our own table and our own equity and our own story and all the things. So yes, I agree.
And this is the perspective of HerCsuite Radio, of the way Natalie runs this and the way the podcast goes, is it sets this idea and the premise of it that it doesn't have to be what we have been told it should be. Right? We have the opportunity to reframe that. And that mindset set for your podcast, Natalie, is just brilliant in it sets a different tone of listening. So now I'm listening with this idea, and I'm hopefully binge listening to all of them, right? I'm listening with this idea that things could be different. And here's a story of someone who did something different and still got a great outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yes.
That has huge impact ongoing. And that's really what I think is so brilliant about HerCsuite Radio.
Thank you so much. And, when this airs, the episode that I have coming out next week will have already aired, but it was a story that just touched my heart. And so February 1st, if anyone's listening, go to that. Go to next Wednesday. Back to February 1st.
To February 1st, right?
Go back to February 1st to hear the story by an archaeologist about women and our DNA and where it comes from, and knowing the names of women on our history line of like, who passed your grandmother? Can you say who your great grandmother's name? Can you say your great great grandmother's name? So it's just thinking differently and always trying to bring those topics that are really interesting, that touch the person's heart. And I hope that will. So I had to do a shout out to that one, because that one, I was so moved. Premise. I couldn't stop thinking about it all day after I interviewed her.
That's like engage. I actually just said this the other day because something came up and it reminded me of my Nan, and she passed away quite a few years ago. But when it came out of my mouth and I was like, oh, that's something my Nan would have said. And it felt like such a nice thing that has carried on in me. Like it felt so wonderful. And I think that we don't do that enough. You're right. We don't carry that forward enough.
But there is this tiny bit of DNA in us from our grandmothers and our great grandmothers. It's actual true. So when you said that, you were actually carrying her through in that tiny piece of DNA.
That even makes me feel even more better, because I always feel her. And now I I can't wait to listen to that episode.
Yes.
Yes, I love that. That's so great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the C-suite. Okay. Because I think that this is, there's a lot of businesses like mine where, we're at this stage, you're starting to build a board of directors, you're starting to do this. And I'm sitting here thinking, I don't want to. And I know that sounds like really weird, but I don't want to. Like, it's something I've been pushed at from some of the investment groups that I'm working with, is to sort of expand this board of directors. And I don't want to do it, because I don't want it to be done in this way of like, well, you need to add this person so you have some, credibility with this group. And I was like, no, I would like people who take action. I would like people who are like actually add real value. And until you can show me that they are going to add real value beyond a name or using my company as a name for themselves, then I'm not so sure. So I really do think that C-suite model needs to be flipped on its head.
It's really interesting you said that. So when I started HerCsuite, we had 11 women, 2 groups of 11 women, and we all thought we wanted to be in the C-suite, like all 11. And you know what happened? Some retired, some declined the C-suite. We have women that decline those opportunities because they don't want that.
No,
now,
and
there
that's
are
the
women
thing.
that do want that, and we cater to both. So we have women that are on the fast track, on the super highway to success, as Jen, who I referenced earlier, would say. But there are also women that don't want that. And I understand what you're saying, because I self-funded my startup and I don't have anyone to answer to but myself.
Right.
It's scary
and
sometimes.
It's like,
I relate to you of what you're saying. Cause like, well, I don't want those people giving me advice. I picked my advisors and they're awesome.
Right. And this is the thing is when you have your directors and your VPs and all of that level of everything, they really need to be able to be a part of that board of directors level and the C-suite in which they're working within, because and it has a different model, a different place to it. So my creative director, who's a male, but he and I have been friends since college. We've known each other a really long time. And he's at a creative director level now. And part of it is because he's still a professor teaching. And so he's not ready to commit more than that. And he put out an email to me saying that he wanted to be a more significant part of our company moving forward and wanted to earn that position in a sort of our inner circle of making decisions. And I thought, wow, he's a friend I've known for 30 years. Like he could have just picked up a phone and called it and said, I want to earn it this year. And I thought, that's brilliant. He's seeing we're doing something that he wants to be a part of. And I thought, this is great, because also we're a little female heavy. So it's nice to have someone.
I understand that.
We're a little female heavy in our whole leadership team. So I could use a few more really good men in there. So, because I do want to be well balanced. So, I think this is time. And I think shows like yours and what you're doing with her C-suite in general as a community is so necessary right now to start to delve into. If they're not interested in the opportunity, maybe it's because the opportunity is flawed. So what does that new C-suite look like? What does that new company look like? How can we make this something really everyone wants to be a part of? Because when they contribute, it's beautiful, right? You get beautiful results.
It so is. I think that's the big thing is engagement. Everybody's always looking for engagement. And I used to think, and the Binge Factor is an amazing platform for consuming content and learning things. And I think that is what people are craving. People want to know information. They want to connect in an important way. And so I think what you're doing is amazing. And I've admired it since before we did our podcast, and I still admire it. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Natalie. I so appreciate important. That. But, I think what you're saying, though, is that it's something that's kind of sort of in the prevalent mindset right now, which is the fact that there's too much thought followership, that there's too much of the same going on. And that's only going to get worse the more AI we use, the more, the more we conform to this model of it. And that those who are out there saying the C-suite doesn't have to be like this, the podcasting business doesn't have to be like this, right? And we're going out and marching to our own drum and our own model of business. This needs a platform, and you created that. So that is really valuable. And I really hope that the takeaway here from our listeners is that your voice is valuable. Your viewpoint on your community is valuable to setting the tone for so many others to be able to find their voice.
It's so true. And I think what you were saying just a moment ago about thought leadership, you've probably noticed this with online events, and that is one of the facets of what we do. And I used to stress a lot about like, oh my gosh, I have to have, 1,200 people come to my event. And you know what I'm finding? That if you get a room of the right people, that's what matters, because they're able to connect in a way that's super meaningful and personal. And that is the most important thing. And so that connection piece matters more. It's not only about broadening, but it's about really understanding what the other person is looking for and how you can be of service to them.
Well, yeah, I think you're so right. I've done way more 50 people and under events and gotten a lot more value on it, not just in the outcome of people buying from us or other things, but in value for what I got from the event, from the connections that I made and the things that I personally learned. I like that much more smaller, intimate event. And it's what I've been saying yes to this year as a difference. And in fact, we turned down all sponsorship opportunities at larger events and just shifted to a smaller model.
I think it's because you're going to resonate with people in a way that they are your right target audience, right? I had someone say to me, I didn't even realize this, but she was at an event recently and she said, that was your interview. You nailed it. And I was like, what?
You didn't know you were being screened.
I was like, I just thought you were really great. And I invited you to this event. And she's like, that was your interview. You nailed it. And so it was a small group and not super small, but like the size we're talking about. And she's like, I felt so comfortable. I felt like I was home. What better thing could you hear?
That's it. I think that that's something that comes really across from the way that you operate and the way that I like to operate too, is just this intimacy level that you're creating all the time that comes across on the radio, comes across on your podcast, comes across in an event. And as you were saying, and I think this is probably is that you like to know every single person that comes through and into your group. You want to get to know them. And then it's hard when we get bigger. Like right now, I'm at the size of the number of clients where I don't know them all. I don't anymore. And it's impossible for me too, because we've hit, we're into the thousands now. So it's like,
amazing.
It's so hard.
That's
yeah.
amazing.
But I wish I did. And so I keep trying to find ways to make sure that people circulate in front of me, finding ways to do that. So, but it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to keep that intimacy level as you grow. And, but I think it's something we're striving for. And
well, they hear you. I mean, so when you're doing these interviews and you're doing your show and they hear you and they know you in ways that you don't expect, right?
That's right.
They hear you.
Absolutely. Well, before we go, I want to give you a chance to tell everyone a little bit about how we can find HerCsuite Radio. Just what you're going to offer them in terms of what kinds of programs and other things, like the panel you have coming up, which will have already aired when this airs. But I'm sure you'll have more in the future. And then a little bit of advice for those that are in what we call them permanent potential here, who haven't gotten off and started their podcast yet. But a little bit of advice for those people.
So in terms of HerCsuite Radio, we're on all the platforms where you can find HerCsuite, and also our podcast, and then also on our website, HerCsuite.com. So I'd love to have anyone come and visit there. They'll find your episode there and a blog post about it. And on our YouTube channel, they'll have a mini of you. So I might go back and enhance that a little bit, send it to you. So
there you go. Check out her YouTube shorts. I mean, this is great that you're doing that now. So
I know you told me, you said SEO. I'm like, oh, I better do something. Tracy
for those
TikTok,
for those TikTok influencers and those using and sharing other people's videos, this is the place. Go find them on YouTube Shorts and share them out.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're doing is so valuable. When I started in podcasting, it was 2016. And I took a course. I think I told you that when we talked a long time ago with John Lee Dumas, but it was a lot harder to learn how to podcast. And there was a whole system, and I think now it's so much more accessible to what you can do. You can get a really great mic, and it's not a big, investment.
Not a big spend. Yeah.
No, exactly. Compared to what it was back in the day. Right. So I think it's so much more accessible. And what's important is knowing what's in your heart and the message that you want. And think of it like this: you're denying the world something that they want to know by not doing it. So don't not shine your light out. It's important.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Thank you, Natalie, for shining your light out and bringing HerCsuite Radio and HerCsuite community to the world.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here with you, Tracy.
Natalie not only shines her light out in her podcast and is encouraging you to do that, but in her network, HerCsuite network. I mean, just so powerful to create this net worth and network of so many amazing women together. And then getting them mixing together and engaging together and highlighting them and promoting them and introducing them and creating power partners and all kinds of other things. That to me is truly the high value of a podcast. And that is absolutely HerCsuite Radio. And what Natalie Benamou has just built is just evident in everything that she does. And that's why you're going to want to check out the blog post for this episode. You're going to want to go check out HerCsuite and see how you might be able to benefit from this amazing network, and go and listen to the podcast so that you can understand better about the quality of women and the quality of voices that Natalie makes it a point to shine a light on. So if you're looking for other great women who you might want to listen to, today is International Women's Day. I mentioned that earlier, that we are airing this episode on International Women's Day in 2023. because Natalie is running an amazing panel today. So we're going to have links to that in the show notes for this episode. We're also going to be highlighting some great women who have been on our show in the last year, not just Natalie today. So we're going to be highlighting some other great women that I want you, and great female podcasters that you ought to pay attention to. So International Women's Day, celebrate it by supporting your favorite women podcasters, and start by sharing out this episode with someone you care about, someone who could benefit from the beautiful network and the heart-centered community of top-level C-suite women that Natalie has created. So thanks everyone for listening to The Binge Factor. I'm honored that you share my show and listen to me. And I want to make sure to pay it forward. So make sure you tell me if you find some other great podcasters, women or not, doesn't matter. I'm looking for all kinds. I want to hear all kinds of original voices who are having an impact on you. So make sure you share them to me, and I'll highlight them here on a new episode of The Binge Factor. So thanks everyone for listening. I'll be back next time. Can't wait to hear from you.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.